Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to cover one of the simplest checks you can do to better understand the health of your bike's engine and detect early signs of minor issues well before they become major problems. The good old spark plug. Today we're going to have a look at these fellas and see how we can easily remove them from your bike. I'm going to cover the procedure to remove them and a way to ensure that you don't damage the threads or the spark plugs in the process. I'll also cover how you can actually understand the internals of your engine and understand the health of your bike simply by looking at the spark plug. And finally, I'm going to cover how you can reinstall these spark plugs to ensure they're easier to remove next time and how to ensure that they've got the best conductivity possible. So without further ado, let's get into it. First, ensure your engine is cool, preferably at room temperature and certainly not after a ride. You want it as cool as possible. Remove the cylinder head protection cover if fitted, and then remove the lower head cover. Next up, you remove the upper spark plug cover, or for the 2V OEM option, remove the 3 screws and remove the panel. Now, if it's the first time you've ever taken this off, it could be on quite tight, so you need to use a little bit of a trick to help get it off without scratching your heads. So the little tip is just simply covering the screwdriver with a bit of insulation tape, great stuff, and that'll help avoid scratching your heads when you're trying to take off the primary cover. And that's how easy it is to take off. And immediately underneath you're going to find a coil. And unlike old systems where you had one coil for multiple cylinders, on the new system, which is called the C.O.P system, you have a coil on each spark plug. So it's the coil on plug. If you are wondering what an ignition coil does, well, it simply converts the low voltage of your 12-volt battery into several thousand volts required to jump across the gap, creating an electric spark at the end of the spark plug. Disconnect the upper ignition coil wiring connector by pushing away from the securing tab, then pulling out of the socket. The next what we need to do is remove that coil from the spark plug, and to do that we use a special tool. It's a special tool, it's not that special after all. It's not a $200 part from BMW, it's a $5 part from AliExpress, and that'll save you a lot of money from breaking coils trying to get your coil off with a screwdriver. All we need to do is put the open end facing down over top of the coil. Make sure it's got a nice firm seating so that we can actually pull forward while we push on the cylinder, and that'll help us easily pull the coil out. If you're doing this on a side stand only and you don't have your bike in a chock or on a single-sided swing arm, make sure you've got a friend to hold the handlebars, because the last thing you want to do is push your bike over off the side stand when you're changing the plugs. Now, you might not have realised if you're new to motorcycles, but on modern motorcycles it's often the case that you do have 2 spark plugs per cylinder, and the reason for that is to help burn the fuel that is actually in the combustion chamber more efficiently than the old way of having a single spark plug per cylinder. So there's actually a second spark plug. That's the first one. The second one is down the bottom. This is the secondary spark plug down here. Release the upper spark plug wiring from the guide on the lower ignition coil. So now we just need to pull the actual coil off the spark plug, which is a little bit different. It's a right angled one. So you just need to pull on the boot. You don't need to remove the end of the coil with the special tool at this stage. But if you don't want to leave it dangling there, then what you want to do is disconnect the actual wiring. Now, if you do remove your secondary coil, make sure you mark it from the left-hand side or the right-hand side, depending which side you're doing, because you don't want to muddle them up. It's important that the left-hand side goes back on the left and the right-hand side goes back on the right. So once you've removed the coil from your spark plug, it's a really good idea to have a look around that spark plug to make sure there's no debris build up, because the last thing you want to see when you remove the spark plug is debris entering your engine. Now, the easiest way to sort that is simply to give your bike a good clean with some bike cleaner, even some brake cleaner around that spark plug, or even some degreaser, and that'll sort that problem out in no time. Now that we've done that, we can easily remove the spark plugs using a thin-walled 14mm long reach socket like this one here. So it doesn't matter which spark plug you take out first, just be patient and take your time and don't force it, whatever you do. And avoid the temptation to use penetration lubricant, because you don't want that stuff ending up in your cylinders. Instead, use some heat. For example, use a heat gun to warm up the cylinder head just a little bit, but don't use excessive heat or force. Just a little and work it out slowly. And the important thing to note is that it's lefty-loosey, so anti-clockwise to undo, just like normal bolts. It's not like a gas cylinder where you turn it in the opposite direction. Lefty-loosey, anti-clockwise. And as you can see, it comes out really easily. For the second spark plug, the primary one, I'll need an extension because it's a lot further in than the secondary. So once you get that spark plug out, have a good look at the end of it, because this will tell you a little bit about your engine health. If there's any carbon, oil or heat stress showing on that plug, including ash buildup, then you might have a problem inside your engine. For example, oily plugs could indicate valve seals or piston ring wear is allowing oil to pass into the combustion chamber. Whereas a heavy buildup of carbon around the centre and ground electrodes could mean the engine is running too rich or too lean, which in turn could signify that your air filter needs cleaning or changing, or that the air to fuel ratio, the AFR, is out of whack, possibly experienced as a misfire. But hopefully you don't have these problems and you are seeing a nice brown, tan or grey end on your plugs. So once you've had a look at your spark plugs, you've learned a little bit about the health of your engine. In this particular case, the spark plugs look pretty damn good, but we're still changing them because they've done over 20,000 Ks, 12,000 miles. Before we get on with installing the new spark plugs, if you're enjoying this video, please click that like button down below and feel free to subscribe to see more on the BMW R Nine T. But now, let's get on with those new plugs. Installing new plugs is basically the reverse process, but there are a couple of things to pay attention to. First, ensure you install the identically numbered plugs as those you removed. This will ensure you don't try to install plugs which are too long, too hot, or anything else that could cause havoc in your engine. With the spark plug, one of the most important things is the spark plug gap. And that's because that's what controls how much voltage actually ends up at the spark plug, creating the best ignition. And the best ignition also burns the most fuel. So hence you want a really good spark plug gap that meets the specification as defined in your manual. The gap would have correctly been set at the factory, but check it just in case. Maybe it's been damaged in transit. If it has been damaged, rather than try to bend the side of the electrode to the correct gap spec and potentially break it, take it back to the store and get a replacement. After all, it's brand new and you pay good money for it. All you need to do is make sure you buy the MR8B JDS plugs. Now for a word of caution. Avoid using anti-seize, copper grease or any lubricant on NGK spark plug threads. It reduces the thread friction and leads to over tightening, and it can actually end up stripping the threads due to the extra strain that friction places on each individual thread. NKG plugs already have a thread coating which protects against corrosion and includes a release agent. So you don't want to use copper anti-seize or any kind of anti-seize on the threads or anything on the threads at all. What you do want to use, but not on the threads, is a silicone grease, specifically a dielectric grease. So it doesn't go on the threads like I said. Where it does go is on the ceramic part of the spark plug. Now you might be asking, why am I putting a dielectric grease, which is non-conductive by the way, onto a spark plug? Because of course you want the current to run through the plug to give the best spark at the end of the plug. So why would you put a non-conductive sealant onto the plug? Well, you're adding it to only the ceramic part, and the point is you're trying to do two things. One is the dielectric grease will ensure that the current stays in the plug and doesn't escape from the plug throughout the boot or on the coil, and also it helps next time you change your plugs because it makes this a lot more lubricated, meaning that the rubber boot won't grip on as hard as when you did it the first time. The key to putting on dielectric grease is to use a really thin layer. So just get a little bit on your finger and wipe it only on the ceramic parts, being very careful not to get it on any other part of the actual spark plug. you should barely notice you've got any on there, and that'll be sufficient. And just do that to both spark plugs for the left hand side as I'm doing at the moment, and that'll be enough. So as you can see, I've hardly used any on there. You can hardly tell other than a slight shine. It's basically like a mil thick all the way around that ceramic part. So I'm just going to put my spark plug into my 14mm socket. The important thing is to remember that you've got a little wash on the end of your spark plug, and it's really important to include, because if you don't include that, that spark plug goes further into your cylinder, which might be outside tolerances. Now if at any stage you've got your fingers in that dielectric grease and smudged it onto the end of the spark plug, you can clean the end of the spark plug with a little bit of brake cleaner. Now once you've got it in far enough with your fingers so it's finger tight, you know it's not cross-threaded, so now you can apply the required amount of torque to make sure it's torqued to specifications, which is 12 Newton meters. Now it's important you only do one click on a torque wrench, don't do two. Two, you could potentially over-torque it. So I'll get my torque wrench and do the same as what I did for the first. Key thing is to make sure it's seated on the spark plug correctly before applying the torque. So now what you want to do is you want to reattach the coil, which is simply a case of lining it up and gently wiggling it in until it seats correctly. But make sure you find the top of the plug. So there's the top of the plug, I can feel it going in nicely now. Once you think it's in, push it with both hands and listen for a click. Like that. Then you know you've properly seated it. Next what you want to do is reattach the electrical connectors, which I had back there. That's a simple case of just lining it up like that and push it in until you feel a little click. It won't be like the other one. And now it shouldn't be able to come out. Just try to pull it down a bit. You can see that it's in nice and firmly there. Now if you've already started on the right hand side, you probably labelled your coil correctly, like I labelled mine left, but I actually do everything on one side in one go, so I'm not likely to muddle them up. I didn't really need to label it. Anyway, now you get your coil and you install that on your secondary spark plug. You just have to feel for it, be gentle. You don't have to be rough or heavy-handed. When you think you've got that rubber boot on, again, like the primary, give the secondary one a bit of a push, and it should come out with a nice good click. Like that. So now you want to make sure that the primary coil wire is actually attached to the attachment point of the secondary coil. And also you need to connect the wiring to the coil. Before connecting the wiring to the coils, make sure that the contacts on that wiring are really clean. If not, give them a really good clean up with a little brush and then connect them. So all that's left to do now is to connect the cover for the spark plug and the secondary cover for the secondary spark plug. And then we're done on the left hand side. And then we can complete everything on the right hand side. If you have the 2-valve OEM head panels, then just reinstall them with the 3 screws, exactly reversed order to how you removed them at the beginning. If you're interested in doing more DIY jobs, then you might be interested in watching this video right here.